Welcome back to the stage, Bridget Kromhout. And also, if you've never done a talk, I know I'm not talking to the mic right now. If you've never done a talk at a conference, they're pretty fun. You learn a lot, but one is a lot. So the fact that Bridget's doing two for us today is really, really awesome. And you should go out of your way to thank her later, because this is pretty awesome to sharing this much with us.
Okay, thank you, Andy. All right, can people hear me again? Yep. Okay, so this one we're going to keep short and sweet. Andy told me 15 minutes. Do I have to press play on this thing?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay. I gleefully ignored it last time, so I can't promise I'm going to stick to it this time. But, I mean, it was telling me I was done, but I wasn't done. So, with this one, I have given a version of this talk a couple of times, and it was 40 minutes. And this one, I've pulled out a bunch of slides, tried to distill the message down to be like short, sweet, 15 minutes. Okay, shipping software. That's what we want to talk about, right? So if you're going to try to ship your software, you're going to put it in some kind of platform somewhere. And yes, the wheel there is perhaps just a little bit of a call out to Kubernetes, just because they just had their Kubernetes conference this week. Actually, funny story, my former boss from Drama Fever, Tim Gross, who now does product at Joyent, was speaking at the Kubernetes conference. So it's like small, small world. But anyway, so when you're trying to decide how you're going to actually get your software from works on my laptop to ops problem now, which of course we're being all DevOpsy, so we're not doing that meme anymore. But when you're trying to move your software like that, you got to think about where you're going to put it. Like it has to run on something. I mean, you have a platform, I like the part where my speaker remote decides that now is the moment to die. Okay, so you have a platform. Andrew Clay Schaefer actually tweeted this picture that I thought was a really good representation of structured versus unstructured platforms. And if you can't read that, it says infographic to help people understand opinionated and unopinionated platforms. It's like Treehouse, 2x4s. Okay, there's obviously, so that's a simplification. There's a vast continuum between those two. But if you're using, say you're using Heroku, like that's completely done for you. You just, push your application and you're done. Cloud Foundry, the open source platform as a service that, Pivotal builds, which is where I work, is very similar to that. You CF push, you're done. Obviously, the people doing the platform operations have a little bit more to think about. But since Cloud Foundry is an opinionated platform, they don't necessarily have to start from 2x4s and build something on up. It was kind of funny when Andrew tweeted this, Kelsey Hightower replied, well, Kubernetes isn't really like 2x4s, it's more like you have 10 different ladders. And I'm like, yes, Kelsey, you're making Andrew's point for him. But anyway, so I was told that I was supposed to talk about Docker, because Docker, because of the hype cycle. And I was actually, until about I've been at Pivotal about 2 months now, doing tech advocacy for the Cloud Foundry team. And I was actually counting it up and realized that before that, I was on call for production infrastructure with almost no breaks other than obvious on-call rotations. But I was on call for production infrastructure from 1999 to the middle of 2015, which kind of feels like too long, but I still sometimes feel guilty, by the way, when AWS has an outage and I find out about it from Twitter instead of from the creepy PagerDuty voice. I feel a little bit guilty. Not guilty enough to actually go back to it, but at Drama Fever, as I mentioned, that we were running Docker in production, which it doesn't sound that crazy today. It sounds a little bit deranged when you realize Drama Fever started running Docker in production for the entire production request path in October 2013. Oh yes. And this was the reason behind that was when starting to break down from a monolithic Django Python app and deconstructing all of the parts of the platform, whether it be automatic image resizing, user viewing, bookmarking of where they are, because if people are watching video, they pause. When they resume, they very much like to be in the place where they paused. So you need to have that constant ping, sending data, in the case of Drama Fever, into DynamoDB, which DynamoDB, later, sadness. But breaking all of that stuff down into Go microservices meant that the way that Drama Fever was doing deploys did not really work anymore. And yeah, my clicker is deciding to not be awesome right now. But the way they were doing deploys was, hey, we have a bunch of Python. we're going to just do that deploy from GitHub as one does, because it's always super fun. And you remember this from 8th grade. It's like we would find out when GitHub was broken because our builds would start breaking. Our builds would break because we were just pulling stuff directly out of GitHub. And if you're deploying like that and you're running Python, that's fine. If you're running Go, you suddenly have a problem because you can't just check the Go code out onto your images or onto your production servers and say, okay, we're good, because you have to build your application. So moving to having Docker actually meant that they could have Jenkins do these builds and then ship. It turned out to make a lot more sense. If you have to build and ship anyway, then building and shipping everything as a version deployable artifact starts to make a lot of sense. So what you're shipping is a Docker image, whether it's for Python, for Go, or anything else. The stuff on the Docker website at the time did say like not suitable for production use, and it seemed to the Drama Fever folks at that time to be an acceptable risk because LXC was fairly mature. Of course, then Docker moved away from LXC to libcontainer, and then they've since gone to runC, which if you're sitting here thinking, well, wait, I don't even want to Docker all the Dockers. I actually want to do something different, whether it's with CoreOS or Mesos or whatever, even with Cloud Foundry. Like because of the Open Container Initiative that Docker announced at DockerCon this past summer, runC being an open standard means that all of these things are actually compatible now, which I think makes a lot of sense because, again, like spending time in the ecosystem trying to, compete and tear down, compete is fine, trying to tear down what other people are building in order to just build something completely different, I don't think is very useful. And I work for a vendor now, and I'm still here to say, like, that's not useful. It's a lot more constructive to work together and build stuff that'll, fit everyone's needs. So the stuff we were doing at Drama Fever, we were not using Cloud Foundry. I had actually barely heard of Cloud Foundry. This, actually, sidebar, raise your hand if you have any idea whatsoever, other than being something written on a t-shirt I'm wearing right now. Raise your hand if you have any idea whatsoever what Pivotal is or does. Yeah, this is the problem, is like, maybe 2% of the hands go up. So the awareness problem that we have is that even though we're building cool stuff, we don't have necessarily the visibility that something like Docker or Mesos or Kubernetes does. So I guess that's part of my job, part of why I'm here. But anyway, so the stuff we're doing at Drama Fever is having Jenkins not just run tests and then say, okay, go ahead and deploy that code, but run the tests, and if they passed, do either with the Python stuff, just build a Docker image containing that code, or with the Go stuff, build like a shippable container. And this sidebar, it's possible, of course, to make much, much, much smaller images, depending on how attached you are to, I don't know, libc. Like, depending on what kind of external dependencies your code has, whether in our case for like our Android APK stuff or for our Go microservices, it was possible to just take like a from scratch container, and then after, with the builder container, building the Go binary, just shipping that. Much smaller attack surface, moving towards unikernels. It's not exactly unikernels, but that's where things are going. It also allowed for a much more, using Docker in this way, or containers of any sort, allows for a much more standard developer environment. Because instead of and I blew up my dev environment, now I'm fixing that, it's like, Docker pull, Docker run. Okay, you have the exact same development environment as everyone else. Also, like, unless you've got people in your C-suite like Jamie, which not every organization does have people who are super techy and excited about all the tech, you're not usually going to have people at your C-level who are really excited about things like the details of your deployment process. So like we're techies, we like to get in the weeds about like, we're going to use Mesos with Marathon because you got to have a scheduler, or like, hey, Kubernetes is talking about their 1.0, what's in there? Or Docker 1.9 just came out, the networking is great. Like, or Cloud Foundry, the latest release, you can run Docker images natively. Like, we get excited about that stuff, but you got to like take that step back and look at what all of the people presenting about, our application logic monitoring we're talking about, which is we care about our business logic. Like, realistically, most of us are not in the business of building platforms. So you got to think about where are you adding value to the business. And if it's innovation in your platform space is where you're adding the most value and putting most of your engineering talent, you might have to rethink that. So it's like, like actually adding value to the stuff you're trying to make money or meet your other goals with is where you probably want to put your energy. Also, I just have to kind of ask, like, you're going to laugh because whose work, all right, some of you have worked with me at this startup. When you throw a whole bunch of tech together, I like to think of this as like resume-driven development. Super fun to play with all the toys and glue them together in different ways. And it's shiny and it's great. And it takes up a lot of time and it makes your resume look hilarious. It may or may not actually be what's useful for your organization. So I think that's like the sanity check when we're all saying, but I want to play with X. The sanity check is, and the value we're going to get from this is Y. Is it worth the investment of our time to spend the time building the platform in this way? Because like, let's see if I can get this to actually, I think, and this is something that Schaefer, my boss at Pivotal, said recently on one of our podcast hangouts, that 90% of tech is tribalism and fashion. It's like tribalism, okay, what are the cool kids using? Or what are all the people that I want to hang out with at their conference using? And fashion, like, hey, this is the stuff that's at the top of the Gartner hype cycle. That's what we want to use right this second. So yes, Andy used the word Docker to get you to show up in this room right before lunch. And I guess the lunch will be in here, so it's not that much of a stretch. But realistically, it's like, I'm not even really talking about Docker, except to say that, yeah, I did use it in production for a year, and it was pretty solid. It worked pretty well. Yeah, there were bugs, like device mapper is sadness as a service. You should never use it. But like, so different storage engine things had actual problems. But I think it's really important to remember that like when we try to build these platforms, and make no mistake, you are building or operating a platform. If you're doing any kind of ops for your organization and running the stuff in production that your developers are creating, you're doing work on a platform. Even if it's not as a service for the general public, it's as a service for your organization. And getting caught up in the hype about what the fun stuff to use is might blind you to the fact that you really need to make sure you're not wasting your time. Because Schaefer likes to say, like, please stop spending your time building, fragile Rube Goldberg machines. Like, I don't know about you, but I've totally built the artisanal bespoke Docker wrapped in Python, wrapped in Packer, wrapped in Chef, with a bunch of janky bash in there. Because if people tell you there's no janky bash, like, they're lying. There's always janky bash. And you can build this, and it probably will work. And you just have to decide, like, what do you want to spend your time doing? I think it's pretty important to remember. Because, yes, I have a lot of, this is a Schaefer heavy deck because reasons. To be fair, I quoted a lot of tweets of his before I worked for him. I'm pretty sure this is a good like service discovery for who you want to work for. It's like, why don't you go work for Jamie because he's pretty fun. And if you're in this room, you're probably working for Jamie in one regard or another, or you have. And what Schaefer said here is like, okay, so if something really actually doesn't work, you're going to fix it. But how many things have you done because they're temporary and they're probably not going to last forever? It's just to get you through to the next time that you'll totally be able to fix it, just for this sprint. Do you remember the sprints that we had after one particular webinar where it was implement everything that the CEO says we do, sprints part 1 and part 2? And it's like, how many things did we do in that kind of short amount of time that we ended up keeping forever? So, and when you're thinking about your platform, like what I think, and again, this is not really Docker specific. This isn't Kubernetes, Mesos, Marathon, Nomad, HashiCorp has some cool stuff in this space, Cloud Foundry, whatever. This isn't specific to any of these. This is just contracts and promises. What promises does your platform make? If you log as a developer, if you log in a specific way, then are the logs going to end up in one of those lovely tools that we saw? So you can see them in the way that you expect. Because if your platform doesn't provide that, you've got problems. I like to think of it as like, if you're writing 12-factor apps, okay, that's cool. You need to have 12-factor ops. You need to have that handshaking to complete the circle so that people aren't wasting their time writing these great apps that don't have the underlying infrastructure to support them. And I think that developers can get really excited about wanting to do exactly what it is they want. Maybe they want to Docker all the Docker. And the operations folks are thinking to themselves, are we really ready for them to be Dockering all the Docker? I mean, what happens if they're writing things that are stateless, but we have lots of state? I mean, I got news for you. State is genuinely where you're making your money. It's like, this is where you're saving information. You need that. So I think building reasonable constraints into the platform that you're creating or that you're procuring from wherever is really important. Like, okay, we're going to have a constraint that you you can't actually use any port you like. You're going to use the ports that are expected, or you need to actually talk to these endpoints because that's what's expected. Like, building in reasonable constraints, I think, is pretty powerful, and it frees you up to not have to, again, innovate in your platform space. Like, do you want every developer coming up with an innovative way to log? Because that's not going to end up being fun, and it's not going to end up in all of those tools where you're going to want to be able to visualize it. And to close out, I'm going to point out that the 18F people who are working with the U.S. digital services, brought to you by the folks who saved healthcare.gov. The 18F folks are now working in the innovation space for newer projects for the U.S. government. So less having to talk to old COBOL, but more everybody is building a new thing. And they actually went with open source Cloud Foundry. So this is not a product pitch. I mean, you should totally buy some Pivotal Cloud Foundry and have SPS write us a novelty, publishers clearinghouse size check. I'm definitely in favor of that. But this is actually the core of our product is open source. You can go on GitHub and look at it. And the 18F folks decided that since they wanted to always be shipping code, it made a lot of sense for them to build a shipyard, as it were, that the developers could just push code to and not worry about the logging, the monitoring, the scaling, the auto remediation, the way health checks worked, all of that sort of stuff, spinning up and down of instances, attaching a storage. Like, all of that stuff, while that is an interesting space, is not necessarily the place that all innovation, or that all the innovation tokens for your organization should be spent. Keep in mind the whole choose boring technology meme that was going around last summer. There's a great blog post on that from an ex-Etzian. And he just mentioned, you can only spend so much of your effort and time innovating. So choose it wisely. Your underlying infrastructure is probably not the place you want all of the adventure and excitement. Speaking as someone who has been on call, please don't put all the adventure and excitement there. So thank you for listening. I only went a tiny bit over my time this time. Now you get to enjoy some lunch. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks again, Bridget, for working double time on the talks this morning. Really appreciate it. So we're not going to do any questions right now to mean you follow that because Bridget offered to lead an open space. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a quick break and do open spaces. While we're all at open spaces, lunch is going to be brought in here. It's just simple lunch, nothing fancy, so we should be able to just sit and eat. There is a Confluence page under event schedule if you want to try to find the open space locations there. Otherwise, it's on the board right here, and it's also on the whiteboard. Sorry about that. It's also. Can you tell us what floor? Yeah, it's all on 5th floor. It's also written on the whiteboard down by the monitors on 5. So just to kind of walk through it real quick, David with Ansible isn't going to be able to be here this afternoon, so he will be at the South Stand-Up Collaboration Station on 5. If you want to chat Docker with Bridget, that's going to be at the Mothership, which is the couches. Sumo Logic's going to be in Berners-Lee. App Dynamics is going to be in Turing. Logic Monitor is going to be at the North Collaboration Station, the stand-up table there. And then we're going to have microservices. Chris Munz is going to be there to chat about microservices and just general AWS tech, and that will be in the cloud. We're going to move the Agile in the cloud talk to this afternoon. Lee is going to just chat a bit about and get some feedback on Agile at SPS. So for those of you that are remote, really strongly encourage just getting together with your offices and just chatting about the content so far. Feel free to throw questions in HipChat. We can try to ask them in the open spaces for folks that are there at those open spaces. So meet back here around noon or a little after. Lunch will be in here. And then Jeff Cessna is going to give us a talk about service design right at 1 o'clock. So thanks, everyone. Very awesome. Should I shut this off now for the next hour and a half?
Do we need to move, or you want us to stay here?
We're hanging out. We don't need to live stream the open spaces, so we'll just sit tight here and then spin up again at 1. Sound good? Great. Okay. Sounds good.
Trying to make it short.
It works good. There's like some general ideas and topics that things
At least 2 hours.
we need to have.